My guest today is Nick Cater.
I suppose I'm still a journalist, Tom. I try and avoid that term, but I'm a writer anyway. I was a journalist for 25 years with News Corporation, and then I spent 10 years running a think tank, and I now got the wonderful title of Senior Fellow at the Menzies Research Centre. A senior fellow is the best job in the world. All the writing you want to do, but no administration.
So you do a lot of writing and a lot of on-camera stuff, right?
Yeah. I mean, I do a fair bit, and we were doing more last year. There's a little TV venture on the go here, which we can get that back on the road. I'll be doing a lot more TV, but right now, I'm on Sky TV Australia. I don't know. I know some people in the US watch that for the Rita Panahi lefties losing it segment, but it keeps me busy.
So one segment that you did that I really enjoyed watching was the whole reporting on the Broken Hill debacle. Can you tell us about that a bit?
Well, Broken Hill is in the middle of nowhere. It's in the far west of New South Wales, just close to the South Australian border. So it's a mining town. So it uses a fair bit of electricity, but it's one of those long, skinny links to the grid, with about 280 kilometres, which holds it into the East Coast grid here. And when that went down, as it did last November, it was just almost a year ago, it went down in the middle of the night and all the power went off in Broken Hill. And everybody thought, well, this will be no problem because they'd installed a load of batteries, some of the most sophisticated inverter technology in Australia, big set of batteries. They had a wind farm, they had a solar farm. What could go wrong? But because when the thing went down about midnight, number one, the battery was flat because it had been putting power into the grid all night. It has to make a buck. And then there was no way of getting it restarted except with a diesel generator. Unfortunately, they'd kept one. They were going to get rid of it, but they kept it. They powered it up. And then to get the rest of the town going, it took about more than a week and a half to get the whole, it's only a small town, about 15,000 people, to get the rest of the town on the grid. They had to ship in portable diesel generators because, as you know, with a grid, you need that synchronicity. And if you don't have it, you can't start a grid just from nothing with batteries and solar panels and wind. It just doesn't work. You need that synchronous energy. They needed the diesel component. So it was a kind of lesson to us here. It was sort of before what happened in Spain, but a similar example. That if your grid goes down for any reason, it's very, very hard to get it back up if you've got a lot of variable renewables in the system.
So do you think this cautionary tale has helped in the rest of Australia in the year or so since then, or no?
Do they ever take any notice of cautionary tales here? I don't know. I hope they're going to keep the diesel there at least in case this happens again. But, the idea you could run this little mini grid completely isolated from the rest of the grid, entirely on renewable energy, was just proven to be a farce. Even though, as I say, they'd spent a lot of government money went into supplying the most up-to-date grid-forming inverters for this setup, but it didn't work. And it's great to see resourceful people in that situation. They drive 500 kilometres to pick up a diesel generator and come back and plug it in and keep their lives going. If only governments had that kind of can-do attitude.
Yeah, so you said something about how if it doesn't work on this relatively small scale, how can we possibly think we can roll it out across all of the U.S., for example? I think that's a great point.
Yeah, and you're not doing it in the US, thank goodness, but we are here in Australia. We have this, we've got the net zero policy, same as anybody else. We've got a government that's trying to chase this hard, despite the fact it's getting nowhere near meeting its targets. But in Australia, and this is kind of unique and bizarre, really, that it is illegal to use nuclear for domestic energy. We can't do it. It's statutory illegal to use it. So you can imagine we're trying to get to this wonderful net zero point with a little bit of hydro. We can maybe manage 8 to 10% hydro on a good day, but we're nowhere like Norway or anything like that, or the Yukon. So that obviously helps a bit. But then everything else we're going to do with solar, wind, and batteries. And I'm sorry, I just can't see technically how that works. Certainly, there's nowhere in the world that's done that, is there? Nowhere in the world that's come close to doing it. Perhaps Spain and Portugal, and you can see what happened there earlier in the year. So it's a huge experiment, massive amounts of capital being diverted. And Tom, the interesting thing is, people outside Australia think, oh, it's a massive country, you've got lots of space, but you pretty soon run up against that land issue as well. Because sure, we've got lots of land, but most of it that's accessible is used for farming or other purposes. It's a scarce resource that has alternative uses. So if you start to eat up a ton of that with, or acres, hectares of that with wind and solar, which have very large footprints, then you've got problems. You've got problems with the local community. They don't want their little rural landscapes changed. They don't want to lose their farming. In some cases, we're losing native vegetation. This is places that have never been farmed, right? In the 200 odd years of settlement here, these places are so remote that we've never been able to farm them, but they're going in there, bulldozers, huge earth clearing operations to put in wind farms. It's just absurd. And we kind of hit that point here where there's no more room, even in Australia, for these things.
I think you were saying that Australia is really energy rich with lots of coal and lots of uranium, right? Maybe 1/4 of the world's known supply of uranium. Does that sound right?
It's around that figure, I think, Tom. I think it's around 25% because it's a bit rubbery because we don't know exactly how much is there here or anywhere else in the world. But we export we contribute, I think, about 12% of the world's exports. So we're very reluctant to even export this stuff. I think it's a huge error because, particularly in the strategic environment we're in today, we could be really, really good partners with Canada, the United States, France, by being, just giving them as much uranium as they want for these purposes, and partnering with them in disposing of it, if so be it, or maybe we'd do some refining. We'd improve the uranium here in Australia, not just ship it offshore in its raw form. But we're doing none of that, and I think that if Donald Trump wanted to turn around and have a go at Australia for not pulling its weight in the great strategic challenge we're in, he should have a look at that and say, look, come on, you guys, you've got the uranium, we need it. How about you give it to us? So that's not yet hit the Donald Trump's radar, as far as I know. We've just struck a deal with him on rare earths, which is wonderful. But why can't we put uranium in that same package and have so we don't have to send it to Kazakhstan or anywhere like that? It would just be in a unique, safe, Western eco trading system, and surely that'll be good for all of us.
So I had Peter Ridd on a while back from Australia, and he was talking about the global vibe shift. I don't know if you're seeing that from where you are, that maybe people are buying into the climate scam less maybe than they were even 1 year ago.
Well, it's interesting. I think they're slower here. Sure, yeah, I mean, people are, but it's taking much longer because I think that delusion that, the world's about to end and we've got to do everything we can immediately to stop it. I think that is held here quite strongly. It's been a very political issue here for 15, 20 years. We've had the two main parties at odds on this, or they should have been at odds. Unfortunately, the Liberal Party, which is confusingly our Liberal Party is our centre-right Conservative Party, is wanting to drift in and out of this. So they've signed up for net zero, for instance, 3 years ago. And I think everybody now regrets it because net zero turned out to be some huge, great fantasy. It was a sort of fantastic bit of groupthink in Paris. And now everybody's realizing that you're not going to be able to do it. It's just an absurd target. And you cripple your economy if you try, which is what we're doing here. We've got very, very aggressive emissions reduction targets in Australia, which we're not going to meet, but it doesn't matter because even trying to meet them does huge things to your economy, like shut entire heavy industry sector, of course, which is in process here at the moment.
So you were mentioning a new party maybe called the Teals. I don't know if you call them a party, or how much political power do they have? And they're into the climate scam, right?
They're irritating. They're like mosquitoes, really. they're how can I describe them? So it's the luxury belief party, I think is how you best describe it. So and they do very well in quite well-to-do areas, the eastern suburbs of Sydney with the marvellous harbour views. That's Teal country. I'm in Teal country here, which is North Sydney, overlooking the harbour. So in all those seats, they're a potent force. They're very, very well financed and organised. It's a remarkably professional, cashed up organisation for Australian politics. I think in America they'd think it was probably normal, but it's completely new here. Where do these millions come from? Well, you can trace them. They come from basically people with a vested interest in renewable energy. So there's a group called Climate 200, for instance, makes no bones about the fact that it is there, to save the climate with renewable energy. They disagree with nuclear. And the people that are backing it are people with huge investments in renewable energy. It's a scam. But they basically bought, I think it's 8 seats now in the parliament, and 8 seats in our parliament, a parliament of 150 is quite significant. It can be the deciding block of votes. It's not at the moment, but it is, and they've eaten in particularly to the Liberal, the Conservative vote. So one of the reasons why the Conservatives are so weak at the moment, only one of the reasons, is because of that. So it's been in my view, it's been a very destructive force in Australian politics, and it's embedded this idea that yes, we have to do more to help the climate, and you keep asking them, well, what more can we do? We're already crippling the economy with everything we're doing, but they never feel obliged to tell you that. I think the best way of illustrating it, if anybody's familiar with Thomas Sowell's The Vision of the Anointed, which is a marvellous book from 1995, they are the anointed. They're the ones with the great plan to fix the world, the passion, the moral rigour. They're much more morally sensitive than the rest of us. But they never have to delve into the messy world of engineering or commerciality or anything like that.
How focused are they on women's issues or women candidates? Grok keeps saying women about it.
Women is their big thing. I don't think they've got a single male. They might have, had a couple of male candidates the last election who didn't succeed, but all the elected members are women. That is a big thing. It's the big, all the things you'd expect with well-to-do women who, they don't have to worry about paying their electricity bill, for instance. It's only people, in the western suburbs of Sydney, the poor places, that have to sweat over that. So they don't worry about that. They don't really drive very much. They don't use a lot of gas. And anyway, they've all got Teslas. So it's an archetype, but I'm sure you can picture them, in Boston or Massachusetts or most of New York. You can picture those kind of people.
So switching gears a little bit, what do you think might end up happening with any sort of a global reset, a global financial reset? Have you looked into that much with all the debts around the Western world?
Look, I think that's where the crunch is going to come, really, on this whole net zero delusion. It will come on the finance, and it's interesting to see that global finance now is shifting away from renewable energy and back to things like nuclear, which is, that's the market. The market in the end gets it right, doesn't it? So I think that's definitely where the crunch is going to come. But countries like Australia, where we have a much more involved government, a lot more government intervention at quite a severe level, of course, we're isolated from that to some extent. So you get to the point at the moment where they're trying to put in more windmills, more solar panels, and the investors are wary now. We've been trying to do offshore wind, but there's no interest from investors whatsoever in offshore wind. The government's response is, well, can we subsidise this in some way? Can we give them more tax incentives? Can we basically mortgage the taxpayers up to the hilt to get this great fantasy across the line? So I think that's what's isolating us from it. But it's certainly biting. You can see with the a complete drought of wind investment, for instance. They're all going now for solar panels and batteries because that technology is cheap. But it's absurd. It's bad enough trying to run a grid on solar and wind and hydro, but to try and run it all on solar and batteries, it's absurd. I mean, we've got a big aluminium smelter here in New South Wales. Tomago uses about 950 megawatts of power round the clock. And they're in trouble at the moment because they can't get the energy contracts at the price to make it commercial. So I worked out the biggest battery in Australia, one of the biggest in the world, is called this Waratah super battery. That would keep Tomago going for maximum an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours at a stretch. And after that, the pot lines start to solidify and the whole thing's ruined. You've got to rebuild the thing, basically. So to think that we can have a combination of batteries and solar is fantasy land, really.
I heard you mention that, in your opinion, it might be a better solution for a Broken Hill to have a SMR, small nuclear reactor, for.
Wouldn't that be great? Or an MMR, I think. and the government here has just written those things off as just useless. But I tell you what, they're probably a much safer bet than green hydrogen, which we've been spending a lot of money on. And I was looking this up yesterday. I think that Darlington in Ontario is coming along very nicely. I mean, I visited it last year, about a year ago, and saw the earthworks which are in progress. They finished that now. They're in the process of building the housing. They've got the contract out for the actual reactor part of it. Probably be a year or two behind schedule, but it seems to be going ahead okay. There don't seem to be too many glitches with SMRs, and they'd be a marvelous solution for Australia, where we've got widely diverse spread population, and lots of places like Broken Hill, which are industry there. They need some power, but that would fix them up. And the other thing I think we could use SMRs for in this part of the world is in the Pacific Islands. Places like Fiji and Vanuatu and New Caledonia. These are strategically enormously important places now because of China's ambitions. And if we could provide them with SMR technology, so they're not having to sort of unload shiploads of diesel to give themselves electric power, that'd be marvelous for them and marvelous for the planet, if you think of it like that. So there's so much going for those things. I think we should, if only Australia didn't have this ban and we could actually be part of the development of them.
I'm just looking at your Substack here, Reality Bites by Nick Cater, and you have a special section there called The Grid. Are you one of the only people really focused on energy reality in Australia, or are there other folks doing this too?
Well, I was when I started on this, which is probably about getting on for 9 or 10 years ago. And I didn't feel, I felt resentful, to be honest, Tom. I thought, why should I have to get my head around all these technical details of running a grid? I mean, that's something somebody else gets paid to do. But of course you do. And so I was one of the first in writing about this, certainly writing about the problems with renewables. And but now I'm delighted to say there's a whole army of really smart people that are coming in and contributing to this. So it's a very live debate with some very, very intelligent people. A guy who's the former head of our nuclear medicine facility here, and senior, serious people who are just looking at this and saying, look, the current plan is just not going to work. It's absurd. A lot of them more into the technical details than I am. So that's the good thing here. We now have a real live and intelligent debate, at least on one side, but it seems to me you need both sides of this argument to engage in the technical details of it, don't you? The devil is in the detail when it comes to the energy transition. And unless they're prepared to talk about this and talk about the pros and cons of different options, then, it's a bit of a one-sided discussion.
Yeah, and I am seeing that you have Meredith Angwin on there. I'm wondering if the details, her knowledge, do you think that's getting to the politicians, people with actual power to make decisions? Do you think they're getting educated on this a bit?
Slowly. I particularly my former job, had a lot to do with politicians, particularly on the Conservative side. Spent too much time in Canberra, which is our Washington, talking to these people. It surprised me how little they know about it. At first, and then I thought, well, that's actually not that surprising. They have enormous busy jobs. They've got a whole range of things they've got to get across. whereas I'm just a researcher and a writer, and I can spend all the time in the world, talking to Meredith or delving into these details. So it has been attempt to educate them too, and it happens bit by bit, and slowly they start to tweak to the problems. So there's a huge debate now on the centre right here about whether they should stick with net zero. I'm pleased to say that discussion hasn't landed quite in the right place yet, but at least we're discussing it in terms of actual engineering and commercial reality, not some virtuous argument about whether we're doing the right thing by Gaia or something.
Another voice I'm hearing a lot from suddenly is Catherine Porter from the UK about energy and grid reality and discussing exactly what went wrong in Spain. Are you hearing much from her in Australia or not yet over there?
I've seen a bit of her stuff, but I think it's just symptomatic of what you said. I mean, all of us thought that grids were just things that just ran, and we didn't have to worry about them. But right across the world, they've had their issues in the UK. They've had their issues in Germany. They have their issues in Sweden, where the Swedes get fed up because the Germans are sort of sending up their power prices by going into their supplies. So yeah, I mean it's a global problem, of course, in the US too. And I look at the US as a almost paradise compared to here when it comes to energy. But I know you've got some huge issues there too to work through. So it didn't used to be a problem when we could just use coal or gas or whatever was available, and we've got so much coal here, it's beyond a joke. We've got so much gas here, it's beyond a joke. But the restrictions on actually getting to that resource are huge largely because of the lawfare and green activism which is going on.
Are you seeing a lot of excitement at all in the media over there about the upcoming COP meetings about are they going to save the world's climate, or less excitement now than 10 or 15 years ago, maybe?
Yeah, our energy minister, Chris Bowen, was determined to get the next COP to Australia. So this one's a big, will we win it? It's like we used to be proud to win the Olympic Games here, which we've got coming again actually in Brisbane in the 2034, I think. That used to be the big deal. Now it's, can we stage COP? And I really would like them to do it, because I'd just like some of our good reporters just to hang around outside the airport and chart all the jets coming in and everything. But no, I think the sting has gone out of COP, definitely. Again, it's a slow thing because so many people are so heavily invested in this. They've got so much to lose if COP was to sort of pack up its bags and go home. So they're not going to let that happen. But certainly, what I've picked up is a lot more discussion of nuclear in recent COPs, at least amongst, I think, around 30 or 35 countries. That's helped lead the investors along. So it is a real discussion, although we treat it with a bit of a yawn here. Here's the thing, Tom. I mean, COP was introduced, 1988, was it? It's 30 years old.
30, yeah.
30 years. 30 years old. But if you look at global emissions since they set up COP, well, they've gone up by about 50%. So on a very basic measure, it's not doing its job. And they should surely go back and say, well, is we actually going to be able to reduce emissions this way, or is it just not going to work? But
we know it's a 2-week meeting, and they always run over at the end, and they always announce that something great happened at the very end, right? In extra time. Seems like it.
Yeah, they do. It's a sort of fake staged excitement. The big one I remember is Copenhagen, which was when our then Labour Prime Minister got very heavily invested in this and flew over because he thought it was going to be some great triumph, and came back with his tail between his legs and lost the leadership of the party within months. But he'd invested too much in it. I don't think it ever really achieves anything, does it, except, a warm and fuzzy feeling. And the Paris moment when they came to the net zero accords was exactly that. And it seems that post-COVID, post the invasion of the Ukraine, there's a lot of buyer's remorse around it.
Yeah, someone else pointed out that we had the No Kings protests over here and people carrying all sorts of signs, but hardly anybody mentioned climate. It's like suddenly the issue went away and they're more interested in other stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's gone down the agenda, hasn't it? And Greta Thunberg seems to be much more focused on Palestine now. I haven't seen her rise to the bait at all on what Donald Trump was saying about Bill Gates. But there's another interesting aspect, Tom. I think it's another corrective coming into the debate, really, from the tech sector, as they realise that the huge demands for power from AI and storage. They're not going to give up their green ambitions, but the only way they can really do that was nuclear. And I see Bill Gates, he's involved, I think, in reopening 3 Mile Island, and he's running another experimental nuclear operation. So great to see those guys come to the party. I'm of two minds about nuclear in Australia, because we literally do have so much coal that we never run out, or at least not for hundreds of years. It's easily available. It's cheap to mine. It's reasonably high quality. If we invested in new infrastructure, in new coal-fired power stations, it would be lower emissions than it was before. So yeah, we could run perfectly happily on that. And if that didn't work, we've got, as I say, we've got gas. There's massive reserves of gas which are untapped. So we don't really need nuclear, but I tend to think if it's available and if it's at a good price, it's probably the best option, just on the simple progression to a more energy dense source. It takes up a smaller footprint. You don't have the supply problems that you do with coal. So yeah, it would be a good thing, but I think we're way behind now on it. And if we did change our minds on nuclear, it would take quite a while for us to get up to speed.
Are you hearing about any specific plans about new AI data centers in Australia? And if so, how they're going to power those?
Well, this is the problem. Yeah, sure, they are springing up. Quite near me, actually, there's an area of North Sydney which has become known as Silicon Alley. And it's huge, very impressive data storage centers going up there. But they have an enormous problem with the cost of energy here, the cost of power, which is higher than the OECD average. It's probably easily twice or 2.5 times as much as you pay, say, in Ontario. So we have a real problem with developing that industry here. And most of these centers, I don't know if you've seen it, there's some interesting videos showing you inside of one of these and showing you the diesel generator there sitting on the roof. In fact, I can tell you a story about that. Sky News Australia, who, as I mentioned, I contribute to, they're having to move studios from their location up there, Macquarie Park, down to the city. And the main reason they're moving is that they're building an AI data center next door, which would be fine. But if they had to power up the diesel generators, you wouldn't be able to run a TV station in the vicinity. So, yeah, it's like everything here. It's a sort of patched up solution, isn't it? Everything is sort of Band-Aid stuff. And that's no way to run the economy or no way to run an electricity system.
So how about the issue of free speech in Australia? Are you Substack is helping, I bet, and X opening up, or how's it looking for the mainstream media? Can you get any energy reality through to them in the mainstream?
We have, we're quite fortunate here, really. We have the Murdoch press. So we've got Rupert Murdoch's Australian, which is very much in the same market as the Wall Street Journal. I think, and we use material from the Wall Street Journal in there. And so that gives us a good balance. And Sky News, as I say, that's also owned by the Murdochs. And we've got a bit of talkback radio, which will take a skeptical position. So there is a good balance. But I suppose if you talk about the mainstream media here, we tend to think about the ABC, which is the government-funded public broadcaster, which is it's completely off the planet, off the dial on things like energy or Palestine. No balance in it whatsoever. But fortunately, their audiences are declining. And people have got many more options now. When I first arrived in Australia, 35, 40 years ago, we had 3, 4 television stations, analog television stations. That was your lot. So you did watch the ABC through necessity. But now, well, when there's so much else there, why would you bother? Why watch the ABC preaching lefty nonsense when you can watch Fox and Friends? So everything has changed really. So I'm not really concerned. What concerns me on the freedom of speech thing, Tom, is just the government attempts to put limits on speech, particularly online. So we have somebody called the E-Safety Commissioner, who was appointed by a Conservative government, would you believe? And her job was to kind of keep kids safe on the internet. And we all agree that that's an issue, and we do need to address that in some way. But of course, once you put an E-Safety Commissioner or an E-Czar in place, then mission creeps in. So now they're going, well, we don't want dangerous misinformation about climate. For instance, there's a move to shut that down on the web, and if you print that, you're going to be in trouble. Well, one person's misinformation is another person's information, isn't it? When it comes to climate, and it always comes down in these situations to who decides. And if it's our E-Safety Commissioner, I think that's even worse in a way than having a proper government censorship operation, where at least you've got a panel of people deciding. So. We are in a very dangerous space, and it largely hinges around how you deal with the internet or whether you need to deal with it at all.
So interesting that you mentioned that there are, I guess, close ties between the Australian and the Wall Street Journal, because I just tried to get a digital subscription today to read some of your articles, but it was going to be a common subscription, subscribe once and get them both. I couldn't make it work, but it's just common ownership and very close ties, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Both in the News Corp camp, both Rupert Murdoch, or increasingly Lachlan Murdoch, of course, as Rupert pulls back. He's been he's not celebrated here as a great entrepreneurial hero, but of course he is. He started out with one newspaper in Adelaide, one of the smaller cities here in the early 1960s. And grew that into a massive empire, including, Fox and the whole works. So he has been a great figure for free speech, and at least diversity of speech more than anything, I think, in the world. He has, holdings in the UK and so forth. So he keeps them on track. At least it means there is one other voice. But he's an interesting guy. I mean, when I used to see him quite a bit in one of my former jobs at the Australian, and very interesting. I mean, his view was, well, if you're going to run a newspaper, why not look where the gap in the market is? And that's clearly for conservative, business-minded, market-orientated reporting. If you want more woke nonsense, well, there's so much of that. There's plenty of that. That's a crowded market. So it's, in a way, he sees it as a sensible market decision as much as anything. How extraordinary in New Zealand, for instance, that you've got 4 daily newspapers. They're all left-leaning. And yet when you have an election there, well, it's pretty much like an election in the US or here. It's 50-50, +1, +2, +3. Half the country is not being served by a daily newspaper in New Zealand. That's absurd.
So I'm curious, I watched The Succession on HBO. I'm curious if you watched that. Grok says it's heavily inspired by Murdoch. I don't know if you've seen that. Are there a lot of real life parallels between that fiction and the reality?
Loosely, I think it's. I watched a few of them. I didn't get immersed in it. But yeah, I mean, it's a family. It certainly is a family in recent times that's had 6 big succession problems that have become, public and quite dramatic. So yeah, and it's all fair game, I think, for Netflix or whoever ran that series. It's true. But I mean, what's happened quite recently in the last few weeks is that the family have come to an arrangement for Lachlan Murdoch to take over the running of the thing eventually, and Lachlan's much more of his father's view on a lot of these issues. He's much more conservative, much more. I don't think under Lachlan you're going to see any great changes at the Wall Street Journal, for instance, or the Australian. and it's interesting in the media landscape how much more important those broadsheets have become. They're actually now, within Australia, the most secure business of the lot, whereas 15 years ago it was the tabloids. You know, it was our equivalent of the New York Post, and we've got several of those. They were the really profitable parts. Now it's the big flagship broadsheet papers that present stuff that people will pay for. You know, as you said, you go online and you'll go through the paywall because you want that material. You can't get it anywhere else.
Another question to get back to this global reset. How big of a deal is the Australian national debt? It seems like in the U.S. it's just totally out of control. Maybe it's not as bad in Australia. How do you view it?
Yeah, it should be a much bigger issue than it is. And it is, I mean, by world standards, it's not massive. You know, I think we're up to about 35-40% of GDP. I think that in the US terms, that'll be very, very good. But of course, it's just eating up a whole lot of revenue, just servicing that debt that we could be spending on hospitals or whatever. But the fiscal problem is the big one here politically, I think, in the long term, because we've gone from a country that before COVID spent maybe 24-25% of GDP went on government services. That's leapt up to 27-28 over COVID, and it hasn't gone down. And the government can find no way to get it down. And even if you had a Conservative government elected, I think they would really struggle to get it down as well, because nobody, as in the United States, nobody's prepared to tackle the big one, which is welfare. You know, that's the big blowout, and even Donald Trump, for all his bravado, will not touch welfare. So, this long term, this is a massive issue, and it has associated effects, Tom. So, if you expand the size of government, of course, you're expanding the size of the public sector workforce, and they have attitudes that tend to be quite hostile towards the market, and you get the entrenchment of left-leaning governments that you know that they prefer. So it does change the whole of society. In Australia, we see it between the states. A state like Victoria, which has gone hardest down this role of giving everything to government to do and expanding the role of government. It's quite difficult to get a Conservative government elected there now. A bit like California, but without the sunshine. Yeah.
Do you see the immigration problem being less of an issue in Australia than in some other Western countries?
I don't know whether it's less or more, but it has become a big issue here very quickly in the last 5 years. Up until then, I think we had a fairly successful, well, we've had a very successful migration program. Australia has the largest number of migrants as a proportion of the population of anywhere except I think Liechtenstein or you know, like of a serious country. We have 34% of people in this country were born overseas. That's a lot. I think in the States it's in the low 20s, and even in places like Germany in the low 20s. So we have a heavy migrant population, and it was no problem when migration was controlled. You know, when you had to qualify, it was a skills criteria for migrating here, even more aggressive than in the States. So people who came here tended to be very good citizens. They get high-paid jobs. They contribute a lot, and they settle in. But gradually we've changed that migration mix, and we've increased it. So in the last 3 years, we've had more than 1 million migrants to this country. And when you consider the country's only 28 million people, that's a lot, you know, where people have felt it. There's two places. One is housing, because housing prices are going up, and you're not telling me they're bringing in 1 million people, that's not doing something to housing prices. But secondly, I think that the Palestinian issue has really ignited the immigration debate, because we've had, like everywhere else in the West world, quite rabid demonstrations, pro-Palestinian demonstrations. But worse than that, we've had a synagogue set fire to in Melbourne. We've had Jewish houses defaced with graffiti. We've had Jews threatened on the streets, rise in anti-Semitism. And I think subtly people have said, look, that's not what we thought multiculturalism was. We thought you left your problems at the doorstep and you come here and, you're not going to revisit some ancient grievance about your grandfather losing his olive grove to, an invading Jew 3 generations ago. That doesn't happen here. So that pact has been broken, it seems to me. And so there's a big debate about immigration and a strong move to reduce it or certainly to get it under control so we can actually determine clearly who comes here and who doesn't.
All right. Another post I wanted to ask you about on your Substack is titled Messing with Our Minds, and subtitles Australian government scientists are embedding climate messages in reality TV shows. And there was some ad, I don't know, with coins falling from the sky. If you put solar panels on your house, it's like coins falling on property.
This is the kind of thing, you read that headline, you'd think, this guy's got off with some weird conspiracy theory that government scientists are embedding messages into reality TV shows to mess with you. That's exactly what's happening, Tom. We've got an organisation here called the CSIRO, which has got a long history as the government's chief science and technology office. And it's done some great things over the years, like developed myxomatosis, which is something that helped us get a virus they put into the rabbit population here as we keep the rabbits down. And it did useful things like that. It invented something called AeroGuard. I don't know if you've got that, but it's basically a thing you spray onto your skin and mosquitoes hate it and you never get bitten. This was all the CSIRO, but now what they're doing is they've got a behavioral psychologist on the team, wants to get climate positive messages on reality TV. So they're actually physically working as partners with the Nine Network here, one of the big TV networks, in producing this show called Renovate or Rebuild. I'm sure you've got similar ones there, sort of real estate porn shows where people buy houses and they've actually bragged about this. And when I looked at it, it's extraordinary. Like, so they'll say, what about, one of the characters will say, well, how about we put some solar panels on there? And then the other one will say, oh, yes, everybody's doing that these days. And these messages are targeted by some academic behavioral psychologist because they're supposed to be the kind of messages that everybody goes, it's extraordinary. That surely is not the job of a government-funded scientific organization. And indeed, it's quite sinister, really, isn't it, when you think about it, that's going on. So this is all, it's Dirty Harry syndrome, isn't it? Noble cause corruption, where you think that, how Dirty Harry used any means possibly to get the villains. These guys are in that headspace now. They'll do anything they have to get their ideological message across, even if it's very ethically questionable.
So I'm curious, from my perspective, so many people have come up to me and said that COVID woke them up, and they would tend to believe stuff that experts allegedly said in the past. Do you think it's a similar thing in Australia, that when they put all this messaging and programs, that people are less likely to buy it now than before COVID?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And we've got a whole group of people who've gone off the grid, and they don't believe anything anymore. They'll tell you that the moon landing didn't happen and those kind of things. And well, maybe it didn't. Maybe I'm just foolish to believe it did. But it's trust in the public institutions, isn't it? And particularly trust in public health. So people tend to discount a lot of health messages now, which are probably quite good ones. Like, there's been a rise in people not vaccinating their children for things like measles, and whooping cough, and sure, that those vaccines aren't perfect, but I think the consensus before COVID was that it was a good thing to do for your kid, and now it's all up in the air. So I felt this at the time, that the public health messaging was so aggressive and so one-sided that there was bound to be a backlash when people found out it wasn't true. And, my wife wrote about this extensively for Spectator Australia and during COVID, and followed it in enormous detail about the health messaging and how misguided it was. And now so much of what she'd written is coming home and people are accepting it. For instance, a group of guys I go out cycling with, have had a couple of cases of myocarditis amongst them, which is, I suppose, what happens at our age. But but they now happily say, well, that is a known consequence of the vaccine. Whereas 3 years ago, people would have said, no, conspiracy theory. So, yeah, I think it's had a dramatic effect on trust for public institutions here. I'm sure it's the same in the States. And the other thing it's done, of course, is helped or rather damaged a whole generation of kids who had that experience of isolation and have never recovered from it. And, I'm sure we all know cases of that.
Is there much talk at all in Australia about geoengineering experiments, that global warming is so dangerous that we have to try to blot out the sun? Anything about that?
Well, I shouldn't really mention it, Tom, because you might put ideas in their head. No, not yet. We've had a very narrow discussion, and it's all around this idea of renewables. So they become kind of saintly things here. It's a very one-track discussion, and it frustrates the hell out of me, but we don't discuss the carbon cycle and say, well, if the carbon cycle is an issue, what can we do to encourage plant life, for instance, so we sequester more of this in the soil? And some great innovative farming going on in Australia right now, where farmers are doing just that, and they're doing it not to save the planet, because healthier soils mean healthier cattle, mean more production, mean fewer inputs. It's a economic no-brainer, but that's never discussed or counted. But it is real. There is. I'll tell you a funny story. Rupert Murdoch owns a property called Cruden out in the Ass, and it's managed by his son-in-law. They went over to this more, I'm not going to say carbon farming, but it's not carbon farming because their product is cattle, sheep and cattle. And they just discovered that if you use rotational grazing, so you move cattle on between paddocks and never let it get grazed down to the bare earth, and a whole lot of other things, which is basically just keeping the soil healthier, their place become a lot more profitable. But at the same time, they managed to secure a carbon offset deal with Bill Gates and Microsoft. So Rupert Murdoch is burying carbon in New South Wales and selling the credits to Bill Gates. It's a delicious story, isn't it? Which sort of plays with your stereotypes of both of them.
It does. Okay, we're coming up near end of an hour here. Do you have other points you want to make before we finish up?
Well, Tom, I really hope, I don't know what your thoughts are about Donald Trump. Here we tend to think a bit of a mixed grill, but a lot that's so positive about what he's doing. And I'm really excited by this deal that we've struck here with the United States over supply of rare earths so that we can keep them out of the China's orbit. It's a big challenge to ramp up the rare earth sector, particularly the processing here, as quickly as we need to. But I'm really excited about those sort of opportunities for Australia, contributing to the Western world. I mean, we were always, one of the first to put up our hands up in any war that the United States was involved in, including Vietnam. And we do that because we have such great similar values, and they're values that we think are positive values for the world. So if we can somehow build that into use what we have here, which isn't people, it's not like we can send you a whole lot of soldiers, but we do have a lot of resources. And if we could create this safe trading environment between like-minded nations that would help protect all our nations from strategic invention, that to me is one of the most exciting things that I see the embryo of now. But there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I think I've heard you say that one point of disagreement between you and Trump is his view on tariffs, right? You're not a big Trump tariff fan.
Australia is a small trading nation, which a small trading nation will always do well out of free trade, particularly when you've got so much to sell, as Australia has. So we benefit from having no tariffs. We get cheaper products. We sell more of our stuff into markets. So it's not good, but I think at the level he's introduced them, it's not going to be crippling for us. And I think that obviously there's trade-offs. He's getting a lot of strategic benefit out of tariffs. So there are benefits to the United States as well as, I think, negatives. So it's not nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be at one stage. But we just prefer it if he just no tariffs and we just had a token free trade deal and let the best man win.
I think Elon Musk just put up some tweet about, hey, if we just had enough mirrors in space, we could deflect enough sunlight to prevent the Earth. I think he just did that. I can't find it right now, but it's so crazy.
He could do it, though, right? Elon Musk could do it, couldn't he? It's just extraordinary, that man, what he's able to do. I think he's about the only man I trust with having a go at this. I'll tell you a quick story about the illustration of our telecom system here. They wanted to set up fast speed internet for the whole country. So the government spent a fortune putting up 2 high-level satellites so that anywhere in the country you could get broadband via satellite. Elon Musk came in with these low-level satellites, a fraction of the price, much lower latency, much more reliable, higher speeds. Basically, the government's been done out of business by Elon Musk's low-level, low-orbit satellite. So it's great. Free market. Let the free market reign. If we can do any of this in the free market and taxpayers don't have to fork out money or invest in risky operations, I'm all for it. It's just when governments try and pick winners, we get into trouble.
I just heard Elon Musk say that SpaceX has sent something like 90% of Earth's total payload to space this year. 90% of that has been just from SpaceX. And if that's true, that is pretty impressive.
Remarkable man. Yeah.
All right. Anything else before we wrap up?
I think that's me about done. Tom, I could do with a cup of coffee. So anyway, it's been really good to talk to you. And thanks for what you do. It's a great podcast and recommend it to everybody.
All right. Thank you very much. Nick Cater. Talk to you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you.